Hi guys, it's me, ChazzaHD, and welcome to tonight's season review of course, the 2021 Formula 1 season. What a season it was. Of course, the Grand Prix yesterday to finish off the season was an all-time classic in terms of the moments we had at the very end, of course, between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. But tonight, we're going to get into every team, every driver, and we are going to really show, I think, firstly, how not just that race and, the last few races of the season were good, but the entire season really did deliver. There wasn't that many real, boring Grand Prix. There was always something going on in the, particular weekends, particular races. An absolutely fantastic season, and in my opinion, it was, this season, this 2021 season, it was the best Formula 1 season of all time. Of course, we'll get into that later on, whether, you guys think it is as well, or whether, you think it is, 2012, for example, or 2010, or, some other season. But for me, this has been the best season of all time. And what we're going to do tonight, guys, is... firstly, I'm going to review the title race between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. We're going to go through each Grand Prix during the, during the season, and we're going to look at, all the big moments, how, how the title race played out at every single Grand Prix, and, also look at, who was looking good at certain parts of the season. We're going to get into all of that in tonight's stream, and then after that, we will get into the midfield, and I'll review, all of the midfield teams, and I will get into how I thought they did this season, and, what I think of what, they could probably do going into next season. But this is going to be not a massively long stream, hopefully, but this is going to be a proper, 1 or 2 hour stream. Hopefully you guys are excited to join me tonight for this season review, and as well, hopefully, after yesterday's chaos and just amazing Grand Prix, an amazing end to the Grand Prix, hopefully you guys are doing well no matter what part of the world you're from, no matter what time it is in your part of the world. Hopefully you are having the best possible day you could possibly be having, and hopefully with me tonight you will join in with chat and, add your comments. And remember as well, during the entire stream, even if I'm not reading out comments from the chat, make sure to, comment and give your thoughts on, certain things I've said, or, certain moments in the season, or, certain topics. Make sure to keep those comments coming in live chat, because between each topic, I will be coming to chat to see what you guys have to say. But I think we will now get into it. So, guys, let's start by reviewing, when it comes to reviewing the Formula 1 season, let's start by reviewing the brilliant, possibly best ever title race in Formula 1 history, the title race between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. And of course, it all started in Bahrain. Now, we have to start firstly quickly with pre-season testing, where with the new regulations regarding the rear floor and changes to that, cutting the downforce on that part of the car, Red Bull clearly at the start of the season were getting on better with that, change to the regulations. They looked much better in testing. Mercedes in testing looked a bit erratic. The pace was there, in terms of they were still able to compete with Red Bull, but they weren't the quickest team in Formula 1 anymore, like they were, of course, easily in 2020. Max Verstappen at the first Grand Prix got pole position, looked very, very strong in all of the sessions, but as you can see on your screen, he did not come out on top in the end. And it really was a very, very exciting battle between the two, and really set us up for what we were going to get for the rest of 2021. So Verstappen got away from pole in the lead. There was a safety car, I think, for Mazepin. He led the field away from the restart as well. And then Lewis Hamilton made an early pit stop. Verstappen reacted a few laps later And Hamilton then got the lead of the Grand Prix and would be basically the leader for the rest of the race, even though they would pit, both for another time. Hamilton would pit first yet again. Verstappen would stay out in the lead and do a few more laps, so he had fresher tyres for the end of the Grand Prix. And then, eventually, because Verstappen did have, one, the quicker car that weekend, and secondly, the fresher tyres, it was inevitable that Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton were going to have to decide who won that Grand Prix on track. And it did come down to the last, 3 or 4 laps or so. And Max Verstappen, as you can see, had his go. But it was an illegal overtake, as you can clearly see there, with him on the other side of the curb. Went round the outside at turn 4. But like I said, he went over the track limits, came out ahead of Lewis Hamilton, but thankfully led him back through. And after that, it really was that, because Max lost his momentum and couldn't have another go at Lewis Hamilton. But like I said, that battle, and it was a great battle for a couple laps there between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, it set us up beautifully for the rest of the season. And then 2 weeks, or I think 3 weeks later at Imola, of course, it was the second race of the season. Now with Imola, Red Bull again were looking very quick. Mercedes looked as though they were about a tenth or two away in the true pace of things that weekend. Red Bull, though, made a mess of their final qualifying laps, meaning that Lewis Hamilton got pole position, with Perez surprisingly second, Verstappen in third. But at the start of what was a wet Grand Prix, Max Verstappen, of course, got the lead. A brilliant start by him, right down the inside. Hamilton tried to go around the outside, but really, as you can see, I think from this shot, there wasn't really the room at that particular corner to try and do that. I know some people may think that Max pushed Lewis off the track, but I don't think that's the case. I think Lewis tried to go around the outside, but, there just isn't, again, the space and grip really to do that at that particular corner at Imola. So Max Verstappen got into the lead. Hamilton had some front wing damage, but it didn't look as though it was particularly bad, thankfully. And then for the rest of the first half of the Grand Prix, I would say, Max and Lewis were kind of trading blows in terms of fastest laps, and one would go much quicker than the other. And then eventually, in the last, say, 5 laps or so before the first pit stop to go from the intermediate tyre to the slick tyre, Lewis Hamilton really started to gain on Max Verstappen, and it was getting really close up front. Then they both pitted at the same time for dry tyres. Lewis lost, I think, a couple seconds to Verstappen, but immediately, especially once they started lapping the slower cars, Lewis started to gain again. It looked as though maybe by the end of the Grand Prix, Hamilton would do what he did in Bahrain and get the lead and, win the Grand Prix. But Lewis Hamilton, in a very rare moment, made a mistake and ended up, thankfully for himself, not massively in the barriers, but enough in the barriers to break his front wing. At the, I think, was it Tosa hairpin? Tried to lap Russell up the inside, went onto the wet part of the circuit, and then went a bit wide, and then, of course, went onto the gravel. Then it's, again, slightly into the barriers, broke his front wing, and then toured back to the pits. It was I have to say, quite a basic error, because you would expect a driver of his quality to really know that, if he moves offline, he's going to be on the wetter part of the circuit. But I think he was so focused on catching Verstappen that he, probably didn't account for that when he moved to lap Russell down the inside of the hairpin. Thankfully, though, and I have to say, luckily, very luckily, there was a red flag about a lap or two after he came in for a new front wing. Because after he came in for a new front wing, he was a lap down and down in, I think, 9th or 10th place. Bottas and Russell then have a massive accident. Red flag comes out. Hamilton's then allowed to reclaim the lap he lost, and then eventually, of course, got back up to second place. And like I said, he was lucky that crash happened, because if he did not, if Bottas and Russell did not have their crash and it wasn't a red flag, then Lewis probably finishes in, 6th or 7th? I don't think he finishes anywhere near the top 5. So, yeah, I think Lewis was lucky there. And Max Verstappen, he would go on to win the Grand Prix. Thoroughly deserved victory. He was looking the quickest driver that weekend. Didn't get the pole, but in the race, drove a brilliant race and ended up winning. But that would be, out of the opening races, the only real big success for the Red Bull team, considering the pace they had, because for the next couple races, firstly in Portugal, Red Bull, they had the pace, but they weren't, maybe because they weren't with Max Verstappen as well, they weren't used to being in such a great position all of the time and having such a good car. Maybe the pressure was getting to them, I don't know. But Red Bull, around this time, especially in qualifying, even at the race, like I just said in Imola, they were unable to execute and deliver, a pole lap, or, really keep it together throughout the entire race and not make any critical mistakes. For example, in Portugal, Mercedes locked out the front row. Max Verstappen made, I think, a mistake or two in qualifying that led to him being quite a bit slower than the two Mercedes, and I think had his first lap time deleted in Q3, so he probably could have ended up higher on the grid if he had not had such a messy Q3. Then in the race, he made a good start. I think he got away in the position he started in, which was third, but on the safety car restart after Kimi Raikkonen retired with a broken front wing, he got past Lewis Hamilton and then was right behind Valtteri Bottas. And it looked as though at that point in the opening phase of that Grand Prix, looked as though Verstappen was inevitably going to pass Bottas and win the Grand Prix. But then made a mistake towards the end of that lap. I think the final real corner, out of that very slow right-hander, Max Verstappen got a bit wide. I think probably had to lift off the throttle a bit, and that allowed Lewis Hamilton, who was still very close behind, to get a run on Verstappen and then get past him down into turn one. Then Lewis Hamilton, as you can see, very soon after, he passed Valtteri Bottas for the lead of the race, raced off into the distance whilst Max Verstappen was held up behind Valtteri Bottas. He would eventually pass Bottas just after the only round of pit stops for both Valtteri and Max. So Max would get up into second place, but he would not get any higher than that because Lewis Hamilton was just simply too quick and had built enough of a lead before Max had got past Valtteri. So Lewis took his second win of the season, a very good win in the Algarve. Then, a week later, at the Spanish Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton got pole position that weekend from Max Verstappen in second. Even though it was close in qualifying, it did look as though Mercedes had clearly the quicker car, and it was just Max Verstappen in terms of him being so close in qualifying. It was a case of Verstappen being so great in getting that close to Lewis for pole position. Then at the start, though, Verstappen with a brilliant move down the inside, very close to having an accident with Lewis Hamilton. Verstappen just threw his car down the inside of Lewis Hamilton, got the move done. Hamilton had to steer out to avoid an accident, because if he steered in, then I think both of them probably would have retired from the Grand Prix. And then Verstappen, of course, was in the lead for almost the entire Grand Prix. Almost the entire Grand Prix. When it came to the first round of pit stops, Verstappen just about at the end of that phase of the Grand Prix stayed ahead. Hamilton, though, was still really close behind, and it looked as though that there was still a good chance Hamilton could still pass Verstappen down the main pit straight with DRS open. But Mercedes decided to copy their strategy from the 2019 Hungarian Grand Prix and go for another pit stop onto a set of, I think, medium tyres to try and catch Verstappen yet again, but on fresher and faster tyres. And that's exactly what Lewis Hamilton did. A great performance yet again, like he did at that Hungarian Grand Prix a couple years ago. And eventually he did catch Max Verstappen, and he did pass Max Verstappen for the win of that Grand Prix. Now, I will say, and I think I may have said this on the channel at the time, after the first four races where Red Bull looked, I'd say, very good for most of the first four races, I think the Spanish Grand Prix Mercedes were definitely the quicker team. After the first four races, honestly, my thought process going into, or my thoughts rather, going into the rest of the season was, despite Max having a very good car, Lewis and Mercedes are just, continuing to get it right. And I think they're probably going to end up winning the championship. And that's what it looked as though the season was heading in terms of the narrative for the title race. But in Monaco, it was a completely different story, and it was one of, for sure, the turning points of the season. So in Monaco, I think rather surprisingly, with Lewis Hamilton, Mercedes did not get it right at all. We had a very poor qualifying session, qualifying down in, I think, was it 6th place or 7th place? Very, very poor. Max Verstappen would qualify second, but because Charles Leclerc did not start the race, of course, Charles Leclerc got pole position on Saturday. Max Verstappen was the man who started on pole in Sunday's Grand Prix and led away and completely dominated the race. Lewis Hamilton, we were thinking would make progress, not great progress, but enough progress to probably get 2 or 4 extra points compared to what he was heading for after qualifying. But his race was just as bad, if not worse, than qualifying, because he wasn't able to pass Pierre Gasly in the Grand Prix, but also wasn't able to stay ahead of a couple cars behind, being Sebastian Vettel, surprisingly, in the Aston Martin, and also, critically, Sergio Perez in the Red Bull. So, very bad race for Hamilton, and this was definitely one of the biggest turning points of the season, because if Lewis Hamilton had won this race, very good chance that mentally, with the momentum being so much with Hamilton and Mercedes, that Max may have, his confidence may have dropped, and he wouldn't have gone on to the successes he had a few races later in this title fight. So absolutely critical it was that Max Verstappen won this race, because it allowed him to properly bounce back in the title race, especially considering Lewis's poor weekend. And then after that, we came to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix at Baku. Now, qualifying was a very exciting session. Charles Leclerc, again, surprisingly, was on pole position. Lewis Hamilton, though, bounced back in Baku by qualifying on the front row and qualifying second. Max Verstappen would qualify third. In the race, though, everyone knew that Mercedes and Red Bull would be quicker. Both of them, by the time we came to the first pit stop, which was around, lap 10, lap 11, we all knew that Hamilton and Verstappen and even Perez would pass Leclerc, because Leclerc and his car was just simply too slow. They both did that. Hamilton would pit first, but his pit stop would be about 4 or 5 seconds too slow. So Max, who was still out on track, he, went a lap later on the tyres, pitted and came out ahead clearly of Lewis Hamilton. Perez also pitted, I think, 2 laps later than Hamilton, and he, as you can see on screen, he would come out ahead of Lewis Hamilton. And then the rest of the race, it looked as though it was going to be Max winning with Perez second and then Hamilton third, because Hamilton had set his car up to be very quick down the straights, but in the middle sector, where all the corners were, Perez was pulling away, and Hamilton just wasn't able to keep up with the Red Bull that was so much better in the middle sector. And like I said, looked as though the race was going to continue on being, just that, Verstappen, Perez, and Hamilton. But suddenly, with just a few laps to go, Max Verstappen had an enormous tyre failure at the very end of that long pit straight, meaning that Perez got into the lead, and most importantly at the time, Lewis Hamilton was up to second. Then a red flag came out because of concerns, I think, about the tyres and whether anyone else was going to have a tyre failure. And also, they did have to clear up Verstappen's car and the debris from the pit straight. So that meant Lewis Hamilton, because of course second place on the starting grid, because now with the red flag situations in Formula 1, now they do standing restarts instead of a restart behind the safety car like they used to do a few years ago. Now, because second place at the starting grid in Baku has the inside line, all Hamilton had to do was get a better start than Sergio Perez, and because there was only 2 laps to go, if Hamilton got that better start, Lewis Hamilton would win the Grand Prix and would probably take home as well the fastest lap point, and would become the championship leader and would really hammer a vital blow against Max Verstappen in this title fight. But in a very surprising moment, but also very critical moment, Lewis Hamilton, he got the better start, but he did not take advantage of it because straight into turn one, because according to him, he accidentally, I think, switched on a setting that wasn't supposed to be on, or didn't, some type of brake setting was in its wrong mode. Lewis Hamilton locked up and went off at turn one and ended up finishing, I think, down in 13th or 14th place. I think both Mercedes ended up out of the points that day. So an absolutely horrible race for Red Bull, for Mercedes, sorry. Perez would win the Grand Prix for Red Bull, his only win of the season. Great to see, by the way, Perez winning in Baku, a track where, Sergio has been so good. But now that we're at the end of the season, I don't think this was the absolute critical moment for Hamilton where he lost it all, but definitely this is one of. And you'll see, guys, later on in this review of this title race that when Max had his certain issues at, any given point, there were moments where Mercedes easily could have capitalized, but they did not capitalize fully. This is one of them, and I would say definitely this is one of the biggest reasons, probably the second biggest reason why Lewis Hamilton is not an 8-time world champion. Even if Hamilton doesn't pass Perez and, gets into turn one and doesn't lock up and ends up finishing second, Lewis Hamilton would be world champion now by 10 points or so. So this is definitely one of the biggest moments. It's not the biggest moment. We'll get onto why another moment is the biggest moment and the biggest reason for why Lewis Hamilton is not champion. But this is definitely the second biggest reason. A massive mistake. One of the biggest mistakes of his career. And yeah, I honestly, at the time, couldn't believe, and no one could believe that Hamilton would make that mistake because he's been so cool and calm under pressure in the last few years. And that's what's, allowed him to win so many championships and races. Again, it was such a surprise that happened, but it did, and it was a massive sigh of relief for Max Verstappen. In the next Grand Prix, though, Max in the French Grand Prix would deliver a brilliant lap in qualifying to get pole position ahead of Lewis Hamilton, but the race was less straightforward. Max Verstappen, as you can see, went off at turn one and Lewis Hamilton got into the lead. Max Verstappen would drop into second place, and Hamilton, by the time we got to the first round of pit stops, Hamilton was about, I think, 4 to 4.5 seconds clear of Max Verstappen. So it was looking as though Mercedes were heading for not a dominant win, but, a comfortable enough win in France. But Max Verstappen would pit sooner than Lewis Hamilton, and with the undercut, he would get back past. But the two Mercedes of Hamilton and Bottas were still right on his tail after that first round of pit stops. Mercedes would stay out to the end, but Max Verstappen and Red Bull would copy what Lewis and Mercedes did in Spain and pit again for a fresher and softer set of tyres. And Max Verstappen would pass Valtteri Bottas, and then eventually, with about 3 or 4 laps to go, he would pass Lewis Hamilton and win the French Grand Prix. This was another critical moment in the World Championship. If Max did not win this race, again, things could have been so much different. And I think, given what we saw at the next 2 races after this, the 2 races at the Red Bull Ring, I think this race was definitely responsible for the momentum that Max had at the time. A brilliant win. And I think this win as well was the first time in the season where Max Verstappen and Red Bull as a team beat Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes in a proper fight where, Hamilton and Mercedes did not make it easier for them with a mistake or anything like that. This was the first time they had properly beaten them on circuit in a Grand Prix, with Hamilton and Mercedes, at their best and not being, like they were in Monaco, way off the pace, or like I said, making a mistake. And it definitely, at the time as well, clearly gave Verstappen the belief that he could win the World Championship, because in the next couple races, like I said, Max Verstappen would obliterate not just Hamilton, the entire field with 2 dominant wins in Austria. Dominant pole positions, dominant race wins. Lewis Hamilton in the first race at the Red Bull Ring in Austria, he would finish in second place, but would be, I think, 20 seconds or so off the leader Max Verstappen by the end. And then in the second race, Hamilton was so slow, and he was as well so slow on the particular tyres he had in the second stint of that Grand Prix that he was passed by not only his teammate Valtteri Bottas for second, but even Lando Norris for third. Very poor race for Hamilton this was, and at this, the end of the Austrian Grand Prix, which was the second race at the Red Bull Ring, Hamilton was, I think, probably at his lowest point at this point of the season because, like I said, in Baku, made the mistake. Monaco, he had been poor, and Verstappen had won there. Verstappen beaten him in France and then was beaten the week before in Austria convincingly. And Hamilton was just nowhere near, and Mercedes as well, nowhere near Red Bull and Max Verstappen. And it looked as though at this point, where Max was, I think, 30 or so points clear, it looked as though, as long as Max didn't suffer a couple bad races where, he didn't score that many points or any points at all, looked as though Verstappen just kept consistently banging in podiums, at the very least, until, say, the summer break. Looked as though Max was going to be heading for a big championship lead going into the summer break, meaning that Lewis Hamilton, of course, would have it all to do going into the rest of the season. But at the time, Toto Wolff made the point that one Verstappen DNF and the title race would be, completely different. And that is indeed what was the case a couple weeks later at Silverstone. So at the start at Silverstone, Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen were racing very hard on the first lap. Max started on pole after winning the first ever sprint race in Formula 1. Hamilton started in second. Like I said, they were side by side all the way through the first lap, and eventually when they got to Copse, Max was ahead, not massively ahead. Lewis Hamilton was still right on his tail and went up the inside at Copse. Max Verstappen, though, as you can clearly see, still had his car ahead and was on the racing line. Hamilton, with, I think, quite a desperate move up the inside, tried to overtake, but of course made contact with Max Verstappen, and Verstappen would go off into the barriers. Now, I'll reiterate what I said at the time. For me, this was definitely Lewis Hamilton's fault. I mean, Max Verstappen, you could argue, could have given more space, but I think realistically at the time, you have to, you'd have to look at what position Max Verstappen is in. He's on the racing line, he's in the lead, and if I go back to the picture before, Lewis Hamilton does not have enough of his car alongside, really, to make this overtake work. If you're going to overtake a Copse corner down the inside, you can, it is possible, but you have to have your car at least, fully alongside, if not slightly ahead, if you're going to make it work. If you're this far behind, then either the other driver is going to have to go off the track themselves on purpose to, get through the corner with you without having a crash, or a crash is going to happen. And that is, of course, what happened between the two. And Lewis Hamilton got a 10-second penalty for that, which I think was the fair decision. And after that, wasn't looking good for Lewis Hamilton, because with him, taking Verstappen out, right before there was a red flag to clear up Verstappen's car from the barriers, Charles Leclerc did get into the lead, and it meant that at the standing restart of the Grand Prix, Charles Leclerc would be on pole, and Charles Leclerc would actually lead the pack away. And at the time, we thought Hamilton would, because the Mercedes, all season long has been quicker than the Ferrari, except really for Monaco, in that little fight there. We thought Hamilton, a few laps into the restarted race, he would pass Charles Leclerc, and Hamilton, even though he had a 10-second penalty and would have to serve it as pit stop, Hamilton would still comfortably enough win the race because his main rival was out. And I think as well, Valtteri Bottas was behind, I think, the two McLarens at the time, or one of the McLarens certainly. So it's not like Valtteri Bottas would be able to, challenge Lewis Hamilton in any way. But surprisingly, Charles Leclerc and the Ferrari very quick, and so quick even that he pulled away from Hamilton in that first stint. Hamilton would then pit before Leclerc, serve his penalty, and Hamilton would come out behind Norris and Bottas, who then went up into second and third place. Leclerc pitted a lap later and came out miles ahead of everyone else in the lead. And Hamilton, even when he passed Norris and Bottas, it looked as though Leclerc was going to comfortably win. But sadly for Leclerc, his car or his engine suffered a problem, and Lewis Hamilton, towards the final 3 or 4 laps, would pass Charles Leclerc down the inside for the race win and take yet another win at Silverstone. I will say, though, it was a moment, this moment, it was, again, a big turning point, but I think this was, again, a bit of a stroke of luck for Hamilton, because if, let's say, Max Verstappen, had got through the corner and Hamilton had got through the corner and they had made no contact and Max had maintained the lead, given the pace we were seeing at the time from Red Bull and Max Verstappen, and given as well the weather conditions, it was very hot, that Grand Prix, I don't think Hamilton wins that race. I think Verstappen probably wins that race because the Red Bull and the hotter conditions, definitely the better car, and Max at the time was probably at his peak during the season. So Hamilton, I do think, was a bit lucky that, what happened, and that his penalty did not at all affect his race result. And Hamilton would cut the lead right down, and then going into Hungary, it would be all nice and close again. But in Hungary, yet again for Verstappen, it would be a bad race. So Max Verstappen, because Valtteri Bottas piled into the back, I think, of Lando Norris, Norris would then go into the side Max Verstappen. Verstappen miraculously would continue in the Grand Prix and would finish the race, I think, in 9th place for Red Bull, despite having basically no rear floor to speak of at the end of that Grand Prix after the contact between himself and Norris, and Bottas hitting him as well. So Max Verstappen would have yet another Grand Prix with pretty much no points to show of. Again, only 2 compared to what Lewis Hamilton was going to have, which we thought Lewis Hamilton was going to have, 25, maybe 26 points, with the extra point for a fastest lap, because Hamilton started the race on pole position and was leading when the red flag came out, was leading the race still. So at the resumption of the race, and because Valtteri Bottas was also out, Hamilton had no real competition. Looked as though it was going to be basically the same race we got in 2020 at the same track, where Hamilton, gets into the lead from pole, obviously, and wins by an absolute mile. But after an absolutely colossal mistake by Mercedes to keep him out on intermediate tyres as they were, touring round on the, I guess you would call it, second formation lap, an absolute colossally bad decision from Mercedes to keep him on the inters, because like I said, they were touring around on that second formation lap. It looked, the track, it looked pretty dry. So everyone else came in for dry tyres, but Lewis Hamilton would take the start by himself and would obviously keep the lead, but would have to pit a lap later for a set of dry tyres, and then would drop to the very back of the field still racing. And that, again, is another massive moment in this World Championship fight. Probably the third, I would say, biggest reason why Lewis Hamilton didn't win the championship. Because, again, Max Verstappen basically out of play for a podium or even a top 5 finish because of the damage that he had. Hamilton has another open goal, and Mercedes just absolutely cock it up. And even though Lewis Hamilton would eventually come through, and, he would finish up in, because of Sebastian Vettel disqualification, he would finish in 2nd place, it would still not be really regarded as enough, that result, because it should have been a race win, an easy race win. And if he got that win, then again, things could have been very different. He would, though, because he finished in second and because Max finished down in 9th place, Lewis would take the championship lead going into the summer break. But if Lewis, like I said, even if he had just finished second in Baku and had won in Hungary, Lewis would have been world champion by 20 or so points. So, and I have to say, it is quite rare to see Mercedes doing this, but they did it, in 2 big moments this season where, when a rival of the team, a rival of Lewis Hamilton, makes a mistake or is out of the race for whatever particular reason or out of play for whatever particular reason. Normally, Mercedes and Hamilton, sweep up after them and take home the full points on offer. That's, for example, why Sebastian Vettel lost the World Championship to Lewis Hamilton in 2017 and 2018, because when Vettel made a mistake or retired from a race or, like I said, was out of play for whatever reason, Lewis Hamilton would maximise the pain and take home as many points as possible. But in those 2 particular races, Lewis missed out on probably 30 points at least. Just not good enough. And again, big reasons why Lewis Hamilton did not win the World Championship. But at the midway point in the title race, this is how it looked. So Max Verstappen was second, Lewis Hamilton was in first place. Lewis led by just mere 8 points over Max Verstappen. So like I said, with the Baku and Hungary race, if Lewis had got those extra 30 points, he would have been in a commanding lead going into the summer break. Max had 5 wins at that point. Lewis had 4. Max had as also 5 pole positions, with Lewis having only 3, which I have to say, quite surprising that Lewis Hamilton in the first, 12 races only had 3 pole positions. The other pole positions, other than Verstappen and Hamilton, by the way, were Leclerc had 2, in Monaco and Baku as well. And who else had a pole position? Bottas in Portugal. So it was only 11 races, wasn't it? The first few races before the summer break. It was only 11 races. So yeah, those are the other drivers who had pole position in the first half of the season. But I think as well you could see, in regards to Max Verstappen, if we focus on him a bit, even though I've said, Hamilton should have got, more points in Baku and Hungary, despite Max suffering the tyre failure in Baku, getting took out by Lewis Hamilton at Silverstone, and having be took out really of play in Hungary, was still only 8 points behind, had 1 more win and 2 more pole positions, which is why I'll get onto later why, for me, Max Verstappen is definitely the deserving winner of this World Championship, because, like I said, despite scoring no points in Baku, no points at Silverstone, and only 2 in Hungary, was still basically levelish with Lewis Hamilton going into the summer break. And then the summer break ended and the season restarted. Now, Spa, we won't get into that. Of course, no race took place because of too much rain on the circuit. Max Verstappen, though, would take the win and get half points. I think was it 12.5 points he got for that win. Hamilton finished in third and got 7.5 points for third place. Of course, Russell amazingly finishing second after his second place in qualifying. So the first real race after the summer break, first real race was Zandvoort. Of course, Max Verstappen's home race. We unfortunately missed out on having this Grand Prix on the calendar in 2020 due to COVID. So thankfully we had it on the calendar for 2021. And it wasn't the greatest race in terms of entertainment, but Max Verstappen did not disappoint in front of his home fans, getting pole position and winning the Grand Prix. Hamilton and Mercedes tried their best with a couple pit stops to try and get after Max Verstappen, but Verstappen and Red Bull were just simply too quick that weekend and could not be stopped. And Max Verstappen, after, getting the win, even though there wasn't a race again at Spa, and then winning at Zandvoort, looked as though Verstappen had reclaimed the form that he was in around France and the 2 races in Austria. It looked as though Hamilton and Mercedes yet again had a lot of work to do if they were going to win the World Championship. But then came the Italian Grand Prix. So we had another sprint race that weekend. So Hamilton started on pole for the sprint race. Valtteri Bottas was second. Verstappen was third. Hamilton had a poor start to that race and finished the sprint race in fourth. Bottas would win the sprint with Verstappen in second and Ricciardo third, meaning that because Valtteri Bottas had a grid penalty because of a new power unit, Max Verstappen would start the Italian Grand Prix on pole position, and in second place would be Daniel Ricciardo. And then at the start of that Grand Prix, things did not really, before we get onto the obvious thing, things did not really go the way of both title rivals, both title contenders, sorry. Max Verstappen lost the lead down to turn 1, down to Daniel Ricciardo, who was very quick that weekend, and McLaren also very quick. Lewis Hamilton, as you just saw, he lost position to Lando Norris, so both title contenders were stuck behind the 2 McLarens. Max Verstappen, though, wasn't really all over the back of Ricciardo, and it wasn't clear really that Max was massively quicker than the McLaren. When the first pit stop came, that's really where Max's race properly went downhill. He had a very long pit stop, lost about, I think, 10 seconds or so in the pits with a pit stop problem. Hamilton then, I think around the same time, passed Lando Norris on circuit and was pretty much guaranteed Hamilton to be ahead of Verstappen when Hamilton came in for his pit stop. But Hamilton, when he pitted, had a slow pit stop as well. He lost about 2, 3, even maybe 4 seconds in his pit stop. So it would make things actually a bit closer when Hamilton came out on track, when it should have been comfortably in Lewis Hamilton's favour. And then when he came back out on track, he was obviously positioned on the inside of turn 1 because that's where the pit exit feeds out at Monza. Max Verstappen coming down the pit straight, and because of, his position relative to Hamilton, he was always, and I think rightfully so, had a go at passing Lewis Hamilton because the space on the outside, was there for him to do that. The Max Verstappen tried round the outside on Lewis Hamilton, but unfortunately, because both of them would not give any quarter to the other, they ended up having quite a big crash in the end. As you can see here with Max Verstappen, not Max Verstappen, but his rear tyre almost seriously injuring, if not killing, Lewis Hamilton in this incident. And yeah, for me, this incident, like I said at the time, was a 50-50. Max Verstappen was too aggressive in the second part of the chicane. Lewis Hamilton, though, I think he knew he was there. There's no doubt about it. He knew he was there. You would have seen him in his mirrors coming down the pit straight and into the braking zone as Hamilton braked for turn 1. Lewis Hamilton, if he didn't want to have the accident, Lewis could have left him room and could have, turned out slightly of turn 2 to allow Max to be up the inside. And maybe they would have got through the chicane or the exit of the chicane without any contact being made. But yeah, for me, it was a 50-50 in terms of blame. Both out of the Grand Prix. Daniel Ricciardo would go on to win that race, of course, with Lando Norris in second. The first McLaren 1-2 in 9 years. And funnily enough, the first 1-2 finish of the entire, and first and only, I think, 1-2 finish of the entire Formula 1 season. That just shows you, doesn't it, how exciting a season it's been if we've only had one 1-2 finish, and it was from the team who finished 4th in the constructors. That's absolutely mental. But even though it was a 50-50 in terms of blame, in my opinion, for this incident, without a doubt, this benefited Max Verstappen more because Hamilton was, if let's say Verstappen did not go for the incident, or did not go for the overtake rather, here on Lewis Hamilton, and it didn't result in this. Lewis Hamilton was clearly quicker than Max Verstappen that weekend. The Mercedes was by far the quickest car that weekend, and an example of that could be seen later on in the Grand Prix after these two retired, because Valtteri Bottas, who won the sprint race, started at the back and finished in third place, I think. So, again, clear evidence that the Mercedes was the quickest car that weekend. And if Hamilton had been ahead of Verstappen on the exit of that pit lane, Lewis Hamilton finishes either second or in a brilliant first place. I think it would have been tough still for him to pass Daniel Ricciardo, but because Lewis had the same power unit and would have had fresher tyres, Lewis would have been in a very good position. And like I said, he probably would have finished at least in second place. So without a doubt, it benefited him more than Max Verstappen. The Red Bulls that weekend were not really that quick. So Max Verstappen, like I said, not too disappointed that they ended up both out of the race. And then at the next Grand Prix in Russia, we would have an absolutely mental Grand Prix. Max Verstappen, if I remember correctly, had a grid penalty for this incident that the FIA gave him, but he took a new engine penalty anyway, so that penalty meant nothing in the end. So Max Verstappen would start the race at the back, meaning that we thought Lewis Hamilton would almost certainly be starting the race from pole position. But after a wet, dry, and truly mental qualifying session in Russia, Lando Norris would be on pole position, from Carlos Sainz second, Russell third, and Hamilton, I believe, started from fourth. But Hamilton would have a poor start and would drop down the field. Max Verstappen would have an amazing start to that particular Grand Prix. And as you can see here, at one point was not that far behind at all from Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton, though, and Mercedes were clearly quicker in the second stint, and really for the rest of the Grand Prix. Mercedes were quicker than Red Bull that weekend, there's no doubt about it. And Verstappen was just trying his best to get as many points as he could to limit the damage of starting from the very back of the grid. But Hamilton eventually would work his way up to second place, and Lewis Hamilton would be then right behind and on the gearbox of Lando Norris, who had been in the lead for most of the Grand Prix, and it looked as though he was heading for an easy win, but Lewis was going to fight him to the end. And honestly, if it stayed dry, I think Lewis probably would have finished in second, because Lewis was stuck behind Daniel Ricciardo, Lando's teammate, for a long time earlier in the race. And, Lewis wasn't able to pass because the McLaren was way too quick in a straight line. And as well, passing at Sochi is not really the easiest thing to do. But Lewis would still be right behind him. But when the weather turned and the rain fell, Lewis Hamilton, in this race to the finish to get, of course, the race win, would fare better than Lando Norris. Norris stayed out on track because he believed that the rain would not be that bad. But then the heavens opened, Lando would spin and then end up falling down to, I think, 7th or 8th place in the Grand Prix. And Lewis Hamilton, after switching onto the Inters and getting the decision right, Lewis Hamilton would take a race win. A very hard-fought race win. Was a lot harder than it really had to be, but he got the race win. But the real winner from this Grand Prix, without a doubt, was Max Verstappen, because Verstappen, despite starting from the back, would finish in second because he made such a good decision on when he went to Inters compared to, Leclerc, Sainz, Alonso, and others at the time. Verstappen made such a good decision in that regard that he would jump them all and finish in second position. So Max Verstappen limited the damage, I think, as much as he really could in that Grand Prix. And it would start again going the way of Max Verstappen after this Grand Prix, as Lewis Hamilton would take a 10th-place penalty, I think, for a new ICE. Lewis Hamilton would, though, get pole position. He wouldn't start pole position, but he would finish up in first place in qualifying. If he, of course, started the race on pole position, Lewis would have won it comfortably because Valtteri Bottas won it comfortably, and he obviously qualified in second place. Max Verstappen, though, would capitalise on Lewis having a grid penalty and finish in a comfortable enough second place. Lewis Hamilton tried his best to come through the field and to get after the leaders. At one point, his pace was so good, we were thinking maybe he'd be quick enough to win the Grand Prix, amazingly, from 10th on the grid. But he slowed up. Bottas and Verstappen started going quicker. Lewis did, I think, try his best to stay out on track and do as many laps, on the tyres he started on, and to try and go to the end. But I don't think, honestly, the pace would have been there at the end if Hamilton had stayed out. So he had to pit again, and he ended up finishing, I believe, in 5th place. So gave away 8 points to Max Verstappen. And after that, Hamilton, of course, was very disappointed. Thought he really should have got better and that Mercedes should have done better on the strategy. But that's the way it was from that Grand Prix. But going into the US Grand Prix, the first race in the North American continent, we thought that because it's such a good track for Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton in the past, we thought that Lewis would bounce back and get a vital win for his world championship. But we were surprised that Max Verstappen would actually get pole position, amazingly, at the Circuit of Americas. A brilliant lap by him, but it would not be such an easy win for him, as Lewis Hamilton, as you can see, got into the lead at the start, down the inside. Max tried his best to try and get the lead back on the exit of turn 1, but it wasn't to be. So Lewis Hamilton would be in the lead, but Max Verstappen and the Red Bull car as well were clearly quicker in the first stint, and really through the Grand Prix, when Red Bull were on it, at least the same tyres in terms of tyre life, if not better tyre life, Max and Red Bull were clearly quicker than Mercedes. Mercedes only really quicker down the straights at the Circuit of Americas. So Max would stick right to the back of Lewis through the first stint. Then at the first pit stop, Max would pit sooner than Hamilton. And I think Mercedes really made a mistake by not reacting to Max's pit stop. They would try and go on a different strategy by pitting Lewis a few laps later in his first stop and also his second pit stop in comparison to Verstappen, to try and, by the end of the Grand Prix, be in a position on fresher tyres to win the Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton would close down Max Verstappen in a very tense finish to that Grand Prix, but Max Verstappen had enough pace and the Red Bull car had enough pace on the worn tyres to just about win the American Grand Prix. That right there was one of the biggest moments in the World Championship for Max Verstappen, because, like I said, we all thought Hamilton would be probably the winner of that Grand Prix that weekend because of his history around that circuit. But Max Verstappen, almost on away territory, or in football terms, kind of an away match for Max Verstappen, got a vital win for his championship. And going into Mexico, because of the nature of the conditions in Mexico, we all expected Red Bull to be miles quicker than Mercedes, but Mercedes actually locked out the front row in qualifying in Mexico. The Red Bulls were hampered by a certain Japanese driver in qualifying in an Alpha Tauri, but Mercedes, credit to them, they delivered when it mattered in qualifying, but in the race it would not be a good one for them, as Max Verstappen went right round the outside of both Bottas and Hamilton at turn 1. Hamilton would be in second, Max Verstappen would be in first. Valtteri Bottas would be taken out by the McLaren on the far left there, Daniel Ricciardo, so he would be out of action and wouldn't be able to help Lewis in the Grand Prix. So Max Verstappen would go on to a very comfortable race win. Red Bull, I think, were probably disappointed in the end that Sergio Perez, who was third and was definitely quicker than Hamilton in that Grand Prix, and the Red Bull was miles quicker than the Mercedes in that Grand Prix. I think Red Bull were disappointed they didn't get a 1-2 finish there, because the pace they had, they should have easily had a 1-2, but it wasn't to be. Max Verstappen, though, took another very good race win, and at this point, going into the final 4 races, it looked as though Verstappen was very, very close now to winning the Drivers' World Championship. If he was to get another win, say in Brazil or in Qatar, the next 2, if he was to get another win in any of those 2, then it would pretty much, unless something amazing happened, it would pretty much be over and Max Verstappen would be world champion. But in Brazil, the tide turned dramatically. As in Brazil, Lewis Hamilton, after a disqualification in Friday qualifying, he would start the sprint race from the back. He would come through, though, to finish in, I think, was it 5th place in the sprint, and then would have a much better, of course, starting position with another penalty he had for a new ICE. He'd have a better starting position that he would have had if the normal qualifying session that was on the Friday was actually on the Saturday. He came through the field, I have to say, very, very quickly, even passed his teammate very quickly in the Grand Prix, and very soon was up to 2nd place, right behind Max Verstappen, and in a position definitely to win. Mercedes that weekend were miles quicker than Red Bull. The straight line speed of the Mercedes as well was very, very good, and it looked as though that Max Verstappen was in a bit of trouble. Max Verstappen, by the way, did very well to get the lead of the race because he actually started in 2nd place alongside Valtteri Bottas. Verstappen dived down the inside and got the lead very well, but Hamilton, with fresher tyres from the last pit stop, was now starting to catch Max Verstappen, and Verstappen was going to have to try every trick in the book to stay ahead, and that is indeed what he did. As I'll just switch onto it now. Here you go. So Lewis Hamilton tried to go around the outside. He did actually go around the outside, and he got the overtake done technically, but Max Verstappen braked very late up the inside of Hamilton, and on reflection, Max Verstappen basically just pushed Hamilton straight off the circuit. Went off the circuit himself, as you can see here. But I have to say, this was on the part of the FIA, who I think in regards to Hamilton versus Verstappen in this 2021 season, of course, we'll get onto later how they played a vital part in deciding the championship. I thought up until this race, they had got it mostly right. Say 90-95% right in regards to these two. But this is where they really started to get it wrong. How on earth Max Verstappen was not penalised for what he did, which was a clear case of forcing another driver off the circuit, I do not know. I just don't understand how he didn't get a penalty. Even though Mercedes requested a review of the incident, they still rejected it. I just don't understand how that was the case, because in a later Grand Prix, Max got a penalty or one of the penalties he got was kind of similar to this, even though his penalty was officially for gaining an advantage by leaving the circuit. He also tried in that race to push Hamilton off, and if he did, it would have resulted in a lot worse than this. So I'm very surprised that I'm very surprised that Michael Masi and the FIA decided to not properly review the incident and to give Max Verstappen, say, an additional time penalty for that Grand Prix that would have dropped him to 3rd position. Lewis Hamilton, though, after that, he would overtake Max Verstappen and win the Brazilian Grand Prix. Not the Brazilian Grand Prix, the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, but of course in Brazil. Definitely one of Hamilton's best weekends. I mean, yes, the car, the engine was, fresh and at its absolute best. The car aerodynamically was at its absolute best. I get that. But he was also at his absolute best. And that was definitely his best moment of the season and his best win of the season. And at this point, the momentum, without a doubt, swung in Lewis Hamilton's favour. Because in the next race in Qatar, Lewis Hamilton would get pole position dominantly from his teammate Valtteri Bottas and Max Verstappen in 3rd. Bottas and Verstappen, though, would get a grid penalty for the race for failing to obey yellow flags in qualifying, so they would both start 5 positions lower than they qualified. Max would make his way up to 2nd in about, 5 laps or so. Lewis, though, would easily win the race. It's hard to know whether Max could have fought Hamilton for victory there, because Max was actually catching Hamilton quite quickly in the opening phase of the Grand Prix, then suffered damage to his front wing. So it's hard to say whether Max would have caught and passed Lewis. Again, hard to say whether that would have happened, but Lewis was definitely the best driver that weekend and got a very important victory for his World Championship and continued to keep the momentum in his side of the title race. And then it came to the first ever Saudi Arabia Grand Prix, the penultimate race of the season that, of course, took place about, 8 days ago, did the race in Jeddah, and what a controversial race it was. So at the start of the normal race, that's what I'll call it, until the red flag, Hamilton and Bottas got away comfortably at the front. Of course, Max Verstappen could have got pole position on Saturday. He should have got pole position on Saturday, but he made a critical mistake at the final corner that led to him starting the Grand Prix from third when he would have been on pole by about half a second. That's how quick he was in qualifying. Hamilton would start on pole, Bottas second, and as I said, they would get away very comfortably at the front of the field. And really, for that first stint, up until the safety car when Hamilton and Bottas pitted, and then the red flag period, Mercedes were easily quicker, and it looked as though Red Bull and Max were going to need some luck, really, to bounce back against Mercedes. And luck is indeed what they got, because after Mick Schumacher crashed, the red flag came out, and after the two Mercedes had pitted under the safety car, which came out before the red flag, that left Max in the lead. And then, like I said, the red flag came out, meaning that Max was now in the lead and could go on to whatever tyres he wanted to and have a free pit stop. And Mercedes, at this point, were probably down in the gutter after what happened. But Lewis Hamilton, as you can see on this picture, would get back into the lead on the restart of the Grand Prix. Max Verstappen, though, would brake very late around the outside, and he would cut the circuit in re-overtaking Lewis Hamilton. The race was red flagged again because of a crash between Russell, Leclerc, Perez, and Mazepin. So the race, like I said, was red flagged again. So Max gave up the 2 positions to Ocon and Hamilton because, like I said, he clearly gained position on those 2 on that restart. So at the third standing start of the race and the second restart of the race, it was Ocon on pole, Hamilton second, and Verstappen third. And Hamilton, on that third restart, he got a good initial launch. It looked as though he was going to get into the lead easily. But Max Verstappen showed that he has his balls are the size of cannons by absolutely throwing it into a position, in his car, into a position that looked quite dangerous, right down the inside at turn 1, forcing Hamilton to make contact with Esteban Ocon. Verstappen, though, fair and square, would get the lead of the Grand Prix with Hamilton in second, but Max would be on the medium compound tyre and Lewis would be on the hard compound tyre. The hard compound would perform much better in the race conditions compared to the medium, and that was really the case all weekend long in Saudi Arabia. And eventually, Lewis Hamilton would have a go at repassing Max Verstappen for the lead of the Grand Prix. Verstappen, though, who was so desperate to keep the lead, of course, for the World Championship, would dive down the inside yet again on Hamilton, similar to what he did at Interlagos. Hamilton, luckily, not luckily, but I'd actually say brilliantly, avoided the incoming crash that was going to happen if Hamilton had kind of followed what path Verstappen was on. Verstappen would cut the corner and would keep the lead. And Max would get, rightfully so, a 5-second penalty for this, which effectively did cost him the race win. He would, though, before he got that penalty, he would be told, rightfully so, to give Hamilton the position so that they could avoid that type of penalty. Max, on the approach to the final corner, would slow down, but because there was a long DRS straight right after that final corner, that's why Max was letting him through at that particular corner, because he knew if he let Lewis through and then got a great exit from the final corner, Max could be on the lead straight away going into turn 1. And Lewis knew this, so when Lewis came up behind him, Lewis, tried not to pass and tried to outsmart Verstappen, but they ended up both outsmarting themselves. And Lewis Hamilton went into the back of Max Verstappen. That caused damage to the rear tyre and rear end of the Red Bull, which meant the Red Bull was much slower now than it was before. And it was pretty slow compared to Hamilton before. Hamilton would have front wing damage, but not enough front wing damage to mean he wouldn't win the Grand Prix. Eventually, after some more shenanigans where Max let him through again into the final corner, but then dived down the inside to try and again get the DRS. Verstappen tried it again, but Hamilton this time wise to it and would force Verstappen to go a bit wider through the final corner than he would ideally want. And then Hamilton would get into the lead, stay in the lead, and Hamilton would win in Saudi Arabia and get the fastest lap point. meaning that going into the final race of the season that, of course, took place yesterday, they were level on points. Couldn't be set up better, could it, for the final Grand Prix of the season. And in qualifying, firstly, Max Verstappen would get a brilliant pole position. Lewis Hamilton would be second. We all expected Hamilton to be a bit quicker than he was, but you have to give credit to Max Verstappen. He did a great job in getting pole position. But at the start, it wouldn't matter because Hamilton, similar to what he did in 2014 in another race where he was involved in a very tense title fight, that time with his teammate Nico Rosberg, got a great launch from second place, got into the lead, and Max Verstappen would try to have a go at Lewis Hamilton into the turn 6-7 chicane, down the inside at turn 6, and forced Lewis to go off the circuit. Red Bull would be unhappy that Lewis kept position, but really there was nothing else Lewis could do. If Lewis turned into the corner, then there would have been an accident, and of course that's not what we wanted in the final Grand Prix in this title showdown. So the right decision was made to not give Hamilton a penalty or to order Lewis to let Max back through. And then after that, because Lewis was on the harder but more durable tyre, Lewis comfortably pulled away from Max. Max pitted earlier than Lewis for a pit stop, but then was held up behind some midfield cars. Perez tried his best to hold Lewis up and actually held him up, I think, for 8 or 9 seconds in 2 laps to try and give Max the best opportunity possible to try and fight back against Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton, though, would again pull away. There'll be a virtual safety car for, I think, Giovinazzi's Alfa Romeo. Hamilton would stay out on track. Verstappen would pit, but he would still be quite a bit behind. On a fresh set of hard compound tyres, he would bring the gap down from 17 seconds to 11 seconds, but with the amount of laps left, looked as though Max was not going to be able to catch Lewis in time to win the race and win the World Championship. But suddenly, Nicholas Latifi had an accident on the exit turn 14, and the safety car came out, meaning that Max Verstappen could have a final go at winning the World Championship. Max Verstappen would pit for soft compound tyres, but Lewis Hamilton, in an absolutely massive and crucial mistake, would not pit. I don't know exactly whether it was Hamilton deciding to stay out or Mercedes deciding to stay out. I think it was Mercedes, to be honest, because normally it's the team who instructs the driver to come in. I don't think Hamilton is the type of driver who would come in on his own if he didn't know the team would want that. But that was, without a doubt, an absolutely critical mistake by the Mercedes team. I know people may say, well, it wasn't that big of a reason, and Max still would have been, right behind him, and he would have lost position if he had pitted. But you have to remember, the only way realistically Max Verstappen was going to overtake Lewis on the final lap of the race yesterday was if he was on a much softer and fresher compound than what Lewis Hamilton was on. So Max Verstappen was always going to pit because that was the only chance he had to win, is if Max pitted. So Hamilton had to pit because if he pitted, then he would have covered off that eventuality. And if Verstappen had stayed out, Hamilton would have been in the position that Verstappen was in on a much fresher and softer tyre. And then Hamilton probably would have won the race and the championship. So that, without a doubt, is the biggest reason and the biggest mistake Mercedes have ever made in Formula One that I can think of as to why Lewis Hamilton is not sat right now as an 8-time world champion. Yes, we'll get into the controversy surrounding the lapped cars and all of that, but if Mercedes pit Hamilton, in my opinion, Hamilton wins the championship. Simple as that. Even if Max, stays out on track, Lewis would be, again, in the same position Max was in and would be on much fresher tyres to then win the race on the final lap. But on that final lap, Max still had work to do to win the Grand Prix, but the race got going again on the final lap. And in, for me, the greatest moment in Formula One history, and you can go back to my race watch along where me and Nib were shaking with excitement and awe at what was happening. an amazing moment happened. Brilliant racing for basically the whole final lap between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. And Verstappen would overtake Hamilton and would win his first ever world championship. He is the first ever Dutch world champion, and he stopped Hamilton from becoming the first 8-time world champion. Mercedes would win the Constructors' Championship, which I think mostly is down to their pace in the final few races. And I think they do deserve Mercedes to win the Constructors, because I think as a team they have been stronger. You know, their driver lineup especially has been stronger than the Red Bull one. But when it comes to the Drivers' Championship, like I said earlier, and now that we've reviewed all of the action during the season, for me, Max Verstappen is the deserving winner of the Drivers' Championship, because it was this close, remember, in the end. But, you know, if you factor in that he had a tyre blowout in Baku, was took out by Hamilton at Silverstone, and also was took out in Hungary, let's say the Baku incident doesn't happen, he wins there. Silverstone, let's say he finishes second there, to be fair to Hamilton, then Max probably would have had the championship won in Saudi Arabia or even Qatar. So that's why, for me, Max Verstappen deserves to win the championship. Because if you look at Lewis's season, yeah, there are certain moments where Lewis is unlucky, like Monza, for example. Even though I don't think he was totally blameless in that incident, he definitely, did not benefit at all from that incident. Verstappen didn't benefit overall, because obviously you want to be in the race still. But if Hamilton continues in that race at Monza, I think Hamilton probably ends up the winner. So I'm not, going to discount that Hamilton had his unlucky moments. But in comparison to Verstappen, I don't think there are as many. And I think Max Verstappen was the better driver this season, and I think deserves to be world champion. And I'll now get on to the standings at the end of it all. And what a battle it was. Max Verstappen winning the world championship. 10 wins for him, 8 for Lewis Hamilton. 3 of the last 4 races were wins for Hamilton. So just shows you how good that late spurt in the season was for Lewis. Max, 9 poles. Lewis has 5 for his Formula 1 season, which is, I have to say, out of 21 races I think we've had this season, nowhere near enough for him. I think even though next year's regulations, we don't know what's going to happen in terms of who will be the quickest team, I think Lewis will want to do some work on that, because qualifying was definitely an area where, compared to Verstappen, he was lacking a bit. And Max winning the championship by 8 points, of course, getting the fastest lap point as well that he had before all of the safety car madness and all of that. But like I said, Max Verstappen, in my opinion, is the deserving winner of the World Championship. Great title fight for me. After what happened yesterday, it is the greatest title fight of all time that I can remember. There's other great ones, of course. Senna versus Prost, Schumacher Hill, Villeneuve Schumacher, Hakkinen Schumacher, the 3-way fight in 2007, obviously 2008, 2010, 2012, the Rosberg Hamilton years. All of that is great, but I don't think any of them can match this title fight. But like I said, Max Verstappen for me is the deserving winner. Hopefully these two can do it again sometime. If not, we will remember this as the time or the season where quite possibly the 2 greatest drivers of all time went head-to-head in a great, intense fight, and we got, maybe, you never know, of course, what Max Verstappen will do in his career. We maybe will get the answer to who is the better driver in the end. Of course, Max Verstappen has a long way to go in his career, so you never know what could happen, and has a lot to, catch up on in terms of world championships, race wins and pole positions. But Max Verstappen, what a season. Great driving from Hamilton also. But Max, absolutely brilliant. And he is a world champion. But guys, I'll now just quickly bring these pictures back of yesterday. And what I'm going to do now, before I move on to the next topic, is I'm going to come to you guys in the chat to get your thoughts as to the championship fight. So let me know in the chat, what did you think of the title fight? Is it the greatest in F1 history? And also, do you think Max Verstappen deserved to win the championship? Before I get on to that, though, I just want to quickly address, of course, the controversy at the end. We will get on to that controversy between Verstappen and Hamilton. We will get on to that towards the end of the stream, because I do have some things to say. And also, I'm reserving the end of the stream for the latest news that is going on in the world of Formula 1. But yeah, let me know in the chat right now, who do you think was the deserving winner? And again, if there's anything you disagree with me on, then make sure to let me know in the chat. But guys, if you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, because after this week, and of course after the Christmas period and New Year period, when we get into about 9th or 10th of January, I will start doing content again. There'll be about 3 videos a week during the proper winter break starting in January. So don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications bell for F1 winter content, bottom right of the screen, where you can click subscribe. Smash the like button as well, and share this video and channel everywhere you can. Of course, it does help the channel grow. But for the next few minutes, I'm going to read what you guys have to say in the chat. Of course, there's a lot of scrolling to do, so I'll try to find the best comments I can, but keep them coming in the chat. I'll make sure to read out your comments as I can, or as quickly as I can. Let's look in chat to see what you guys are saying. Ruse, that was a big deal, I think, in reference to Baku. I would say Lewis's biggest error of the season, but bad starts in sprint races also killed him. Yeah, the bad starts in those 2 sprint races were definitely bad. For example, if Hamilton had won the sprint race at Monza, Lewis probably wins that race by an absolute mile. So, yeah, that is true. But the Baku mistake, I think, before, this Grand Prix, was definitely, if Lewis was going to lose the championship, and let's say that pit stop that they should have taken Mercedes in the final Grand Prix, if that didn't happen and Max had still won the champion, even if even if Mercedes had not made that mistake, then that Baku race would have been seen as the biggest reason. But I'd say the second biggest, because I think, I do not understand why they did not pit him in the final few laps there. James says in chat, Spa should not have counted. There should be a rule saying that 10% of the race must be completed on a green flag running. I don't think they could have done any green flag running. So I think really what happened was, the only thing that could have happened, unfortunately. Hopefully we get a race at Spa next year. I will say as well, I should have mentioned this when I went through the Belgian Grand Prix. That race is, I think, one of the biggest, maybe the biggest what-if of the season. In regards to the championship, yeah, who knows what could have happened. We know Lewis Hamilton in the wet is very good. Also Max is, but you never know what could have happened. And, your talent in the wet is definitely going to show at a track like Spa, where it is probably the best racetrack in the world. So who knows what could have happened there. But in regards to Russell and to anyone else who was in a car that, wasn't that quick in the dry, who knows what could have happened, and who knows what could have kind of story we could have got out of that Grand Prix. Because remember, Sebastian Vettel qualified 5th. You had, I think, Latifi and the Williams as well in the top 10. So like I said, you never know what could have happened in that Grand Prix. Ruse saying, in regards to Hamilton's mistake, yeah, the button that Hamilton pressed, I think, was the magic button. Extreme brake bias for warming up the tyres during a lap to the grid. Checo forced that error by cutting over so hard while Hamilton was shifting. True. In Hungary, Mercedes didn't mess up strategy. They gambled. A gamble. Yeah, it was a gamble, but if you gamble and it doesn't pay off, then that's you messing it up. And it wasn't just a gamble what they did. It was a massive gamble, because every other team pitted other than them. And I mean, if you go back and watch that warm up lap to the grid for the restart, it was the track was dry. There's no doubt about it. I don't think there was much really, there was much debate needed, honestly, because like I said at the time, you could clearly see that, that it was a dry track. I remember saying it at the time, actually, in the race watch along. If you go back and watch the race watch along and go to the, when the race was restarted, I remember saying, you know what, track's dry. If I was out there, I'd come into the pits. And what happened? They all came in except him. So, yeah. Let's look at chat. Yeah, sorry by the way, Israel in the chat. Yeah, I wanted to make sure I got all my thoughts out and, analysis out about the battle first before I came to chat. Also, that part of the stream you just listened to will be uploaded as a video tomorrow. It'll be clipped from the stream. It'll be uploaded as a video for tomorrow for anyone who did not watch the stream. So, yeah, that's why I couldn't pay attention to chat, but that's why I am at the moment. Bear says, I would say penalties should be given on consequence given how the field can spread out greatly on so time penalties can become meaningless. Place drop penalties would be fairer as you can't escape them. Let's look for some other comments here. Roosaroo says, except for Mexico, I think Mercedes was faster for the entire back half. I wouldn't disagree. I wouldn't agree with that. And then they say rain thwarted their efforts a lot around the summer break. Hard to say with Spa, but Zandvoort, I think Red Bull were quicker. And then after that, probably, I think the US Grand Prix, I think Red Bull were quicker, and obviously Mexico. But yeah, I think the majority of the second half of the season, Mercedes were quicker, but I think a big reason behind that was Mercedes having such a good power unit in that final few races in the part of the season. Hello, by the way, to Ronan Brady in chat. Hello to everyone in chat, by the way, who has or is tuning in right now. Great to see you all. As always, let's have a look. Not a mistake, Shazza. Max stays out of Lewis pits and magically we end under safety car, I bet. Let's not start that. Come on, let's not start that. If Lewis was the man in second, let's say the roles were reversed, I think the race would have gone ahead still. That last lap would have still happened. And I still think, ultimately, it was the right decision, restarting the race. Because we couldn't end the season on a safety car. Yes, the correct procedure wasn't followed, but he should have let the lapped cars through before. He should have let them through a lap before, and then the race would have restarted, and no one would have had a problem. I mean, there's probably people who still would have cried, to be honest, about it, because, yeah, Max was lucky to a certain extent, but like I said, I think Max is the deserving winner. But yeah, if the safety car had stayed out until, the very end and Max had been in the lead, yeah, that would have benefited Max, obviously. But like I said, I don't think it should have ended behind a safety car. But secondly, I think Mercedes, they should not have been anticipating that. Because that really would have got them out of jail. Holy Crapper says, but if Hamilton pitted Max without track position, like I said, even if Max has track position, Lewis would have been in the position Max is in. And it probably would have been easier, to be honest, for Lewis to overtake Max because Lewis has much quicker straight line speed. So Lewis probably, I think, wins the race if he pits. Simple as. I think, yeah, there's a chance Max would have passed him if Max, say, was second and he had also pitted for softs. But if Max had stayed out, I think Lewis definitely, unless Max puts up the greatest defense of all time, I think Lewis Hamilton would have won the championship. Let's look at some other comments here. Blade Rise in chat. He says, I'm not going to lie, I wanted Lewis to win. I personally think both drivers deserve the championship as they were both exceptional throughout the season. I can't choose one winner. I mean, I think they both drove very well. And I'd say, yeah, I think both would be deserving. But I think if you're comparing the two and saying who's the more deserving, even if Lewis was the champion, I would still say Max was the more deserving driver. And if anyone here doesn't think I would say that, then if anyone here, was around when I had my old channel, or even at the early days of this channel, you'll know that, when Lewis Hamilton lost the championship to Rosberg in 2016, I was saying that, Hamilton was better and Hamilton deserved it because Hamilton only lost it because of reliability issues. I mean, there were other reasons, bad starts and a couple incidents, but reliability issues were the main reason Hamilton lost in 2016, and that's why I felt Hamilton was the deserving champion, because I thought Hamilton, in terms of, pure on-track driver versus driver, I thought Hamilton was the better man. Max for sure won due to luck in Abu Dhabi. That takes nothing away from how much he deserves the title. Max is the rightful champion. Yes, according to Holy Crapper. Stug Dog, I think it is, says Verstappen deserved the title if you think Baku and Silverstone. And Rook saying good comments from the very beginning of stream. Catch them all. Let's see if there's any others here. Tandem says Max definitely is the champion. Qualifying, he was on fire. In the races, he was on fire. Lewis, on the other hand, made a lot of mistakes. His race pace was mental at the end, but that was always the case. Indeed. Let's see if there's any others. Michael Ram says, how about they do a 4-lap race between Max and Lewis next week on fresh, soft tyres? Let them battle it fair and square. I don't think it would be necessarily fair because that's not how racing works, is it? It has to be a full race distance and all of that. Let's see if there's any others here I've missed. A super chat from Michael Ram for €2, who says 5-lap race next week, Lewis versus Max on fresh tyres. I mean, of course, if that happened, I would cover it and it would be exciting, but I honestly, I want it to be decided in the most normal way possible. I think that's the best thing, honestly, for the sport. Thanks for the super chat, by the way, Michael. Ruxfoot says I could handle the ending under safety car. He says I could handle it ending under safety car. I can also accept how it did end, but it speaks volumes about the organisation of F1 at the moment, not the driver's fault. Nib, by the way, my co-commentator yesterday, tweeted out and actually got quite a lot of likes. By the way, don't forget to go follow him on Twitter. Was it Niblo331, I think, is the @ on Twitter. So @ Niblo331. He tweets a lot, so make sure to go follow him. He did a tweet and it, like I said, got a lot of likes and basically said, I think everyone can agree Michael Massey needs to go, and that is true. Michael Massey, like I said, out of his depth. He hasn't got the experience needed, really, to perform in that role in the best way possible. And I think because he's still a lot younger and less experienced, I think maybe is swayed by different things that shouldn't matter. So, yeah, I think Michael Massey has to go. But will he go? Probably not. Probably not. Andrew Williamson says it wasn't ended how the rules say. Why doesn't anyone care that drivers behind Lewis and Max were not given the chance to unlap themselves and maybe get points? Well, a few of those cars did get points anyway, but the problem, and this is why we can all agree Michael Massey needs to go, whether you think it should have ended beyond the safety car or not, is that, technically speaking, the rules say that, but I think, just because there are rules in place doesn't mean every single rule is, isn't open to interpretation, as we've seen plenty of times in the past. We've seen this season even that there are certain rules that don't get applied when they should be, like jump starts. There's not really any more penalties for jump starts when there should be. Another reason Michael Masi should go, because that's absolutely ridiculous what he's done in regards to that rule. But like I said, all rules are open to interpretation. Some rules aren't great. And like I said, I think the race should, and I think races, if they can, and that race definitely could, should always end under a green flag if possible. It should always be that way. The problem, in my view, in a neutral, unbiased view, is that he should have let the cars through the lap before, which, if he did, then the race could have got going again, and a lot less people would be complaining. But, I don't think restarting the race, was the biggest problem with that. It was, the lapped cars not getting their chance to, unlap themselves. That was probably the biggest problem with it. But like I said, I'm not sat here disappointed that it got going again, because it gave me certainly memories of, that I'm going to carry for the rest of my life, honestly. But yeah, I don't disagree with the reason to get racing again. I don't, honestly. C. Osp says, I still feel in the heat at the moment it was the easiest decision, but the fairest would have been to red flag the race. But Massey's already said any crashes at turn 14 wouldn't incur red. That's another thing. A red flag probably, would have been the easiest thing to do. And I actually thought that's what he was going to do. But he did not do that. And of course, that's what Mercedes were probably hoping for as well, as a red flag. But yeah, he did not throw a red flag there. But yeah, I still think the championship, Max Verstappen, it's his championship, and I think he deserves it. And by the way, he has been congratulated, Max, by Lewis and Toto, I think, personally. And I think Toto's even said that he did deserve it. So a bit strange, considering the news that we're going to get onto later on in regards to what is going on with the whole situation about penalties and all of that stuff. But I think I'll now move on to the midfield, because of course, when we're reviewing the season, we can't just review Verstappen versus Hamilton, because that is, just one part of this fantastic Formula One season. But now, let's review the midfield and how they got on in 2021. And we'll go through all the teams and, what position they finished in, and we'll go by position as well. So we'll start, of course, with the Ferrari team, who bounced back big time this season. Of course, in 2020, they finished in P6. This season, they finished in P3. We're in a close fight for the first 75-80% of the season, with McLaren for third place. Here, McLaren, who we'll get onto in a moment, were very good this season as well. But Ferrari, through development really only of their power unit, were able to eventually get ahead of McLaren and clearly stay ahead. Ferrari definitely towards the end of the season having the quicker car. We look at it through the season. At the start of the season, it was, I would say, kind of equal between the two teams, and it was looking very close. Of course, Ferrari had pole position in Monaco and Baku. Didn't capitalise on both of them, even though Baku I don't think they would have been able to capitalise on anyway, because they didn't really have the race pace to get to get the race win there with Charles Leclerc to convert that pole position. But yeah, during the mid part of the season, and when we came to the Italian Grand Prix, for example, it looked as though McLaren were going to beat them to third. Really, because despite Ferrari, aerodynamically speaking, had a car that was better and was definitely able at times around certain circuits to compete with the likes of Mercedes and Red Bull, Ferrari was still lacking the power that McLaren had. But with another upgrade to the power unit around the Russian Grand Prix, I believe, for the Ferrari team, that is the moment that really clinched them third place in the constructors. Of course, the power unit, the new one they introduced in view to next season. Next season, of course, they want to be a season where they get back to the top of the mountain that is Formula One. But yeah, really, the development of the power unit and having a good aerodynamic base is the reason Ferrari are finishing third place. So congratulations to them. Good to see them bounce back. Next season, I think they have to be in the title fight because given how they have not really developed the aerodynamic package of their car for about a year and a half now, that much, and have focused a lot on 2022, if they next season are still a midfield team, then they're going to have to blow the whole thing up in terms of team personnel because that's just not good enough. And Binotto will, of course, have to be the first one to go if that is the case. So hopefully next season Ferrari are title contenders. I will also add, though, that despite them finishing third, I still think this team has hallmarks of 2019 and 2020 in them. For example, Monaco should have been a race win, but Leclerc crashing into the barriers at the end of qualifying, and then Ferrari not checking both sides of the car when putting the car back together led, of course, to him not doing the Grand Prix because he actually still had a problem resulting from that crash. So, yeah, really disappointing moment there. And Silverstone, they should have won that, but again, tripped over themselves, tripped over their own dicks. Power unit problem, the reason behind that. Thankfully, they didn't retire from that race, but like I said, they should have won that race as well. So they have still got that circus act, part of their act, but it didn't affect them enough this season to finish lower than third. But they've still got some parts of their team that, I think will cost them in a championship fight. And I think if they are in the championship fight next season, I still think, as long as Binotto is team principal, I still think they will not win a championship until he is not in that role, because I just don't think he can run the team well enough and, in a way that doesn't make mistakes all the time in that type of high pressure environment of competing for a championship. I just don't think he can do the job to win a championship unless they build a car that is, miles quicker than the rest of the field. But in regards to Ferrari finishing in third, I do need to show this quick graphic that really does illustrate that since that new power unit was took on, how much Ferrari, outperformed McLaren, and really how Ferrari dominated McLaren in the second half of the season, and how that power unit contributed to so many good results. So you can see here, this is the final 8 Grand Prix of the season. And then in Russia, despite some grid penalties, I think, for Charles Leclerc, they scored still 15 points. Of course, Carlos Sainz, he started on the front row. McLaren still scored 19 with Norris and Ricciardo. I think Ricciardo finished in... Was it 4th Ricciardo finished in? And then Norris finished up in, I think, 6th place for the McLaren team. And then Turkey, McLaren, only 6 points, quite poor. Daniel Ricciardo especially was poor in that Grand Prix. Ferrari, 16 points. Charles Leclerc, very close as well to a podium in that Grand Prix. Probably should have got a podium because his pace was very, very good that weekend. Then at the American Grand Prix, Ferrari had a strong result. McLaren also, but not as strong as Ferrari. And then in Mexico, Brazil and Qatar, McLaren, very poor showing. Only 2 points from the Mexican and Brazilian Grand Prix, Sao Paulo Grand Prix. And then in Qatar, only 2 points. Of course, unreliability, a crash at turn 1 in Mexico, and a tyre problem in Qatar is the reason why McLaren scored such poorly, so low points-wise, is the thing I was trying to say, in those 3 races. Ferrari, you can see, though, in those 3 races, they ended up actually scoring a combined 46 points. So those were really the 3 races that won Ferrari this battle. In Saudi, McLaren would outscore them by a point, but in Abu Dhabi, it would be 16 points to 6 in favour of Ferrari. But I think Ferrari do overall deserve to finish third because, like I said, I think they had the better aerodynamic and chassis package, and I think better driver lineup, and I just think had a better season than McLaren. McLaren, though, they still had a good season. McLaren, got their first race win in 9 years. They had also, 2 other podium finishes. probably should have won the Russian Grand Prix as well. So, you know, could have easily had 2 race wins this season. But like I said, won their first race in 9 years. Also a 1-2 finish. The only 1-2 finish by any team this season. And their first 1-2 since 2012. I think 2012 they had a 1-2 finish, didn't they? Just trying to think if they did have one in 2012. Not sure. Maybe it wasn't 2012. Actually, no, it wasn't. It was 2010, their last 1-2. I think the Canadian Grand Prix of 2010 was their last 1-2 finish. But yeah, still a very good season. But most of the season, they were in 3rd place. Lando Norris as well. What a season he had. It's a shame he didn't finish in the top 5 in the championship because honestly, he does deserve, I think, to finish in the top 5 of the championship. I know Carlos Sainz has had a good season, but Lando in the first half of the season was absolutely amazing. The amount of top 5 finishes he had in the races. He had also a podium at Imola and a podium in the second race of Austria. Could have had a podium at Silverstone. Finished 4th in Bahrain. Where else? Baku could have arguably had a podium there. So yeah, what a season by him. Daniel Ricciardo didn't have that great of a season despite the win. He had some good races, some good results, but overall Daniel Ricciardo did not have a good season, and he has to improve next season and be, even if he is still slower and not as good as Lando Norris, has to be a lot closer, because there were races where Lando was, 30 or 40 seconds ahead in certain races, and even lapping, I think, Ricciardo a couple times in certain races. So yeah, just simply not good enough on his part, but at least he got another race win. A brilliant weekend it was from him at Monza, where he drove just superbly and got the absolute best out of the McLaren car. He did improve as well, Ricciardo, as the season went on, but I think really the 2 biggest reasons why McLaren didn't finish 3rd. 1, Ferrari outdeveloped them. Even though their only development really was on the power unit side, they did technically outdevelop them. And also Daniel Ricciardo's lack of performance. If Ricciardo was performing to the level of Lando Norris, I think McLaren definitely would have finished 3rd in the championship, because Ricciardo in the first half of the season probably would have got his podiums as well, not just Ricciardo. So Ricciardo definitely has to improve, not just for his sake, but for the team's sake, because they could have got definitely 3rd in the championship, despite Ferrari performing so well at the end of the season. Because Ricciardo and McLaren especially, were much better in the first half of the season. But like I said, still a good season. And I think next season, if they make that next step on the car and can match, Red Bull and Mercedes pace-wise, they've got a good enough driver lineup. They've got a good enough team operationally at the circuit. They don't really make that many mistakes, do McLaren. And you can see in the last couple of years, they've really improved compared to what they were like in 2017 and 2018. This team is really only 1 step away from being title contenders. I really think that. If they just make that step from midfield to front-running team, then I think without a doubt next season, they will be title contenders. Hopefully with Ferrari, and then we'll get a 4-way title fight with obviously Red Bull, Mercedes as well. But you never know what's going to happen in that regard. Alpine, next up, they finished, of course, 5th in the Constructors' Championship. When you look at who their main battle was this season, which was Aston Martin and AlphaTauri, I mean, yeah, good in that regard, but coming into the season, I think everyone expected, and even they expected, that it would be better than 5th place in the Constructors. They did end the season well, but overall, it was not a good season, in my opinion. This team, they've got, obviously Renault backing because they were the Renault Works team last season. They've got the resources, definitely compared to AlphaTauri and Aston Martin, to be, I think, definitely way more competitive than them. And even though Esteban Ocon, as you just saw there, got the race win, Fernando Alonso got a podium in Qatar. Great to see Fernando, by the way, back on the podium in Formula 1 for the first time since 2014. I think Alpine were capable of a lot more. Their driver lineup, I thought, were performance-wise this season, I thought they did really well. And like I said, there were races where Alpine had some good ones. And if the car was just that bit better, 2 or 3 tenths of a second quicker this season, I think Alpine could have finished third. I really think that because, like I said, the driver lineup was good enough and they had, certain races where they were really good despite not being, say, as quick as other teams in the midfield pack. They weren't as quick as AlphaTauri this season, for example. They absolutely were not. AlphaTauri were, I think, the better team, and that's why AlphaTauri should be definitely disappointed that they finished behind Alpine. But this team, they are just the perennial underachievers in Formula One. They really are. They have a lot more potential than they show. Because we've seen, again, this season, race win for Ocon. I know it was in a bit of a lucky circumstance, but the pace from Ocon still, for the rest of the race, was really good. And like I said, Alonso in Qatar, we saw how they were in the final race. Their pace was pretty good. Could have got a podium as well in the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix. They've had some very good races this season. The pace has been good from them. And when they've got it right, they've had some, very good results. But like I said, they just do not show that potential enough. They have way more unrealized potential than I think a lot of people out there realize. And ultimately, it comes down to the fact that the gains they thought they made in the wind tunnel did not translate onto circuit. I mean, they started the season, for example, way, way off the pace of McLaren and Ferrari. They did close that gap in the second half of the season, but just not good enough. And I think Alpine, next season, if they, with the new regulations, if they don't really make a sizable move up the grid, at least pace-wise, if they don't close the gap to the people ahead of them on pace, then Alpine are just going to be a midfield team from now on. And like I said, that is them not performing anywhere near to the potential that they do have. For AlphaTauri, I think AlphaTauri have had a disappointing season in terms of the result of the end of the season, where AlphaTauri have finished 6th in the constructors. Yes, it is a gain on what they had in 2020, but AlphaTauri, pace-wise, were the 5th quickest team this season. Gasly, so many times, who had a great season, by the way. So many times Pierre ended up finishing in the top 6 in qualifying. Of course, had only one podium in Baku. Maybe could have had more if he was a bit luckier in certain circumstances, but yeah, great. I think he had a great season, Pierre. And AlphaTauri, again, pace-wise, they were very, very good. But so many times they failed to deliver on that promise, whether it be a driver mistake by Gasly or Tsunoda, getting unlucky, or problem with the car, an accident, whatever it may be. They just could not put together a consistent run of good points finishes. They just couldn't do it. And with Alpine getting the big results they did, that's what led Alpine, of course, to finishing 5th in the constructors. I still think AlphaTauri, the car they produced this season, I think was a pretty good one. Probably the best AlphaTauri or Toro Rosso, whatever you want to call it, car they've had. I thought they were, very competitive this season, but I still think there was more there for the AlphaTauri team, and again, lost out on that elusive top 5 finish. Next season, though, I think they'll probably be around the same place on the grid, and if they were to still with Gasly be, consistently getting in the top 10, I still think that'd be good enough for them, because I think people don't understand how good of an achievement it is for them to be, fighting like they were consistently with teams like McLaren and Ferrari with a driver like Pierre Gasly. So, like I said, they are performing well still, but I think if you look at this season alone, the end result, not good enough, I'm afraid. For Aston Martin, without a doubt, the most underperforming team of the season and the biggest disappointment of 2021, without a doubt, is Aston Martin. Maybe you could put Daniel Ricciardo up there as the biggest disappointment, but Daniel did win a race. I know this team had a podium in Baku with Sebastian Vettel, and there were a few races where they had a good result, but considering last season they were really the 3rd quickest team, and they probably should have finished 3rd in the Drivers' Championship. So not the Drivers' Championship, the Constructors' Championship. for them to drop to 7th and be, as well, for a few races this season, way off the pace of the McLarens, Ferraris, and even Alpha Tauris at times, or even Alpine at times this season, just not good enough. Of course, the disqualification in Hungary really affected them in terms of could they fight Alpine and Alpha Tauri, because it took so many points away from them that they did gain that they weren't able then to fight fight for any position higher than P7. But yeah, very disappointing season. Despite that, though, because of now the much more money they have and the extra resources they have now that they're Aston Martin, and given the people they're signing from other teams such as Mercedes and Red Bull, even though certain people they have signed won't be starting until midway through 2022 or even at the start of 2023, I still think this team is going to be a good team in the next new era, starting in, of course, next year in 2022. They've always been a team that, despite this season, they've always been a team that has performed better than their budget has allowed them to. So I still think this team will be a force. Maybe not next year, but the year or two after that, I think Aston Martin will be a team to look out for. I think really the reason they finished 7th in the constructors is because, like Mercedes, they got caught out by the new regulations regarding the floor. And of course, Aston Martin / Racing Point from last season, there were, let's put it this way, similarities between the two cars. And it also negatively affected them as well as Mercedes. So, that's what you get for copying. And that's why you shouldn't copy, guys, in certain instances, because if the other person you're copying is getting it wrong, you'll also be wrong. Next up, Williams, 8th in the constructors. A good season, considering how their car is pace-wise compared to the rest of the field. I mean, it is still a pretty slow car, let's be honest. Williams still should be better than what they were this season. But yeah, Williams, I think, considering how tough the last 2 or 3 years has been, finishing at the back of the grid and being a running joke, really, in Formula 1 and in the F1 community, I think this was a good step forward. Russell, great season. I mean, I can't even remember the amount of times he got into Q2 and even sometimes got into Q3. He was that good. The highlight of his season, of course, will be the 2nd place at Spa. That he got in qualifying and, of course, translated into the race because there was no race at Spa. Also, another highlight for him will be the 8th place in Friday qualifying at Silverstone. That was an absolute stunner. But the Hungarian Grand Prix, wow, what a relief that was for them, getting 8th and 9th. Latifi in 8th and Russell in 9th. That really set them off for the season because they were fighting so hard and for so long for a points finish, and finally they got it with, I think, was it 6 points in the end? And then, of course, Russell got a load of points at Spa that essentially guaranteed they would finish in 8th place. I think Russell also scored points at Monza as well, so good job by him. Also, Nicholas Latifi, I think, he does deserve to be in Formula 1. There's no doubt about it. He has, even at the couple times at the end of this season, has out-qualified Russell. Plenty of times, though, even though Russell has out-qualified him, say in Q1, Latifi's been knocked out and Russell's got through. Latifi's not been that far behind on lap time, so I think Latifi, respect needs to be shown to him, honestly. And if Albon comes in next season and definitely showcases what I believe he is, which is not as quick as Russell, and Latifi keeps up what he was doing, Latifi could be the number 1 at Williams next season. He could. He really, really could. Hopefully Williams next season, with them able to have more wind tunnel time because they're lower in the championship, hopefully they've used that well in the last few months to produce a good car for 2022. Obviously sad that Frank Williams passed. Very, very sad. Of course, last year was the end of an era with Williams selling the team to, is it Doriton or Dorilaton Capital? I can't remember the exact name of the company running it now. But yeah, such a shame. He lived a great life, though. Being disabled for so long and still leading the team, still winning championships as a, physically disabled person. And of course, the job he did to build that team and build them firstly into a race winning and championship winning outfit before the car accident in 1986. Just absolutely fantastic what he did. Obviously, what his daughter did, not so much. I think she definitely contributed a lot to the downfall of the team. But Frank Williams, probably the... I mean, I think maybe me and Nib did a stream on this once about, who is the greatest team boss of all time. But now I think of it, I'd probably say Frank Williams was the greatest team boss of all time because... if you look at, say, Jean Todt, Ross Brawn, who else? Ron Dennis. Maybe not Ross Brawn, considering the circumstances behind 2009. So maybe, throw him out of the equation because he doesn't have as many championships to his name as a team boss that, say, Ron Dennis and Jean Todt and Frank Williams has. So, yeah, throw him out of the equation. But compared to Ron Dennis and Jean Todt, even though they had a difficult job to overturn those two teams, Dennis with McLaren and Jean Todt with Ferrari, they had a lot more money and resources at their disposal than what Frank had. Frank literally, had to start the team and build it up from scratch in terms of becoming the championship team they become. So I'd probably say, yeah, Frank Williams, despite, I think, decisions he made later on that led to the team being just a midfield team when really they should have stayed at the front of Formula One. I think Frank Williams, you'd probably have to say, is the greatest team boss of all time. A shame he passed, but even though he has passed, you still have to say, and the disappointment last year of selling the team, you still have to say, considering what happened to him in that car crash, the life he had, still very good, I think. Next up, Alfa Romeo, very disappointing season. Fred Vasseur, the team boss, even said during the last weekend that even though they made a step forward on the car, which I think you did see in the final few races, they didn't really go anywhere with it. So many times Alfa Romeo looked as though they had the pace, especially at the start of the season, looked as though they had the pace to, be in the top 10 a few times in the Grand Prix, but just failed to deliver so many times. Qualifying, they were dead slow so many times. And honestly, if next year they're not really that much better, then I think they're going to have to Sauber, that part of the team. They're going to have to go a different way with, the way they're going with their team, because this Alfa Romeo deal up to this point, it hasn't worked out. Yeah, it may have kept the team alive, but it's not really worked out, and they've got to go a different way, I think, if it doesn't really improve next season, because they have been really, since the second half of 2019, they've been a back marker, and that's not where we want to see them be. And of course, with the driver lineup they have next season of Valtteri Bottas and Guan Yu Zhou, they need to be better. Sadly, of course, Kimi Räikkönen goes off into the distance, but thankfully doesn't have to endure this car anymore. And of course, Antonio Giovinazzi is heading for Mario Kart. We'll see what he can do in that series. And finally is the joke of Formula One, the Haas F1 team, the meme team. What an absolute shit show from this team. Absolute utter shit is what this team is. Yes, of course, they didn't develop the car, but they were an absolute joke this season. If they weren't on the grid, I don't think anyone would have noticed, to be honest. Nikita Mazepin, worst driver probably in this century in Formula One. Maybe not of all time, but yeah, definitely the worst driver that I've ever seen since I started watching Formula One, when I started watching 10 years ago. Just absolutely terrible. Mick Schumacher, the only redeeming light. Hopefully someone can rescue him from this just dreadful situation, because even though Haas have concentrated a lot on 2022, I don't see, given how this team is basically a joke, and has been even in 2019 and 2020, I don't see this team really being a force in the future. If they don't improve next season, really, and are still really at the back of the grid, then honestly, I think they should go, or, sell the team to someone else, because, Gene Haas, of course, should sell the team to someone else, because I don't really see at the moment where this team's going. So if next season they don't return to a proper midfield outfit, then what's the point? Because given that they don't really build their own car, they have to rely on other people so much, I don't really see, like I said, I don't really see where they're going. And the only good season they've had in Formula One in 2018 was because they had a year-old Ferrari car with a up-to-date Ferrari power unit. So hopefully they're better next season. I don't think they will be that much better, honestly. And hopefully they're better to the point that we can actually talk about them in videos, because of course this season I've not even talked about them because they've been just that bad. But that is your review of the midfield. A great midfield scrap this season. Hopefully more of the same in 2022. And there you go, guys. That is the review of the season, pretty much. Just want to quickly look in the chat to see what you guys... no, we don't want that. A black screen. There you go. Back to the front there. I want to hear from you guys as to what I've been talking about with the midfield, but also I want you guys to let me know in the live chat right now, what would you rate the season out of 10 for? I'm going to give this season a 9 out of 10. It wasn't perfect. No season will be, so I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Let me know in the chat what you would give this season for as a rating out of 10. But look, I'm just going to quickly read through the chat to see what you guys had to say in regards to the midfield. Leclerc had the worst year. Can't wait for him to win races again next year. Hopefully, hopefully that does happen. Also, Carlos Sainz, great season. Absolutely brilliant season for him. And I think really proving that he is a top driver, no doubt about it. Say Regara says, I think it was not a bad to decent season for Alpine. Tsunoda is the reason AlphaTauri finished in 6th. Yeah, I think he's a big reason, but there were also races for Gasly where, they ended up finishing a lot lower down in certain races where they should have finished a bit higher. See, Oz says, if going by Aston Martin on-track performance just before mid-season, I would guess they stopped development for the car. I think, that was clear to see. But I think if you look at the first half of the season, it still wasn't that great, or as great as we were hoping, was it? So that's why I still say that they were the biggest disappointment of the season. Hampton says, why was Toto celebrating at a private party and requesting his team to have videos removed on social media? Why would he celebrate losing in a club when he told the media he was talking to lawyers? I saw that video. They have technically won the Constructors' Championship, so, there is something to celebrate, and it is a record 8 in a row. But, it is quite hilarious, to be honest. Let's read what you guys have to say in terms, though, of your ratings out of 10. So Iwi2 says 8 out of 10. I think it was definitely better than last year. I think one thing I will say, obviously I didn't really cover last season on the channel. Last season, when I think back to it, was actually pretty good. I know Mercedes dominated, but it was a really good season. I think we have to remember that. We had plenty of great races. The Hungarian Grand Prix, remember, was a great one. The first race of the season was very exciting. The race at Silverstone that Max won was a great one. Obviously, the one that he almost won was a good one as well. The Italian Grand Prix, of course, what an emotional Grand Prix that was, that Pierre Gasly won. I say emotional because I was also in tears when he crossed the line to win that Grand Prix. Thankfully, I didn't do a watch along that day because I would have broke on stream for sure. Something I almost done yesterday. The race at the Nürburgring was very good. Where else? Turkey, of course. What a classic that was. Sakir Grand Prix was great. There were a few races, though, that weren't that good, but last season as well was pretty good, I think. C. Oz says 9 out of 10. Best season since Mansell versus Senna. Okay. Say Regara says 8.5 or 9. Rooksfoot says 8.5 and deducts half a point because of Spa. Yeah. If we had a race at Spa, then I probably would have given it a 9.5. By the way, thank you to James. Don't know how to pronounce your last name. maybe pronounce it the same as Guan Yu Zhou, but I don't know, depending on where you're from, it might be different. I don't know. But thank you to James in chat who says, thanks for all the videos this year, Chazza. No problem. And I've enjoyed it. And of course, this season, I have pretty much covered all of the season, except for, of course, we weren't live for the Spanish Grand Prix because of a technical issue, and then Russia, Turkey, and what was the other race? US Grand Prix I missed because I was in a really bad mental state. But other than that, I've covered it all. And yes, been an absolutely brilliant season. I cannot wait for next season where hopefully we'll get a 2009 style reset of the order. And if it is similar to 2009, then, you could have Alfa Romeo and Aston Martin at the front of the field. Imagine that. That would just be amazing. And then, Mercedes and Red Bull in the midfield. That would be incredible. But you never know. Could happen. Mercedes and Red Bull have developed a lot this season compared to the others. So you just never know what's going to happen in Formula 1 next. As yesterday proved. Before I go, though. Hello to Crystal Racing, by the way. Before I go, though, I'm going to quickly get into some latest news that you guys should know about from the Grand Prix, and most of it is to do with the controversy. So yeah, Mercedes, they're I think I let you guys know of this, didn't I, in the race reaction stream, that Mercedes protested the results of the Grand Prix. Of course, I came off before the protest was rejected, but the protest was rejected because I think the reason was because the race director has control of the safety car, and thus him having control of the safety car means that I guess the decision to end it at a certain time is right. I guess that's what he meant. Mercedes, though, are appealing the decision, or they have announced their intent to appeal the decision to reject their protest of the race results and to carry it further. They do, though, have only till Thursday to properly appeal it. So if they don't appeal it by Thursday, then it's all over, 100% for sure. And possibly they'll be going to the Court of Arbitration for Sport if they need to. They did have a barrister, a QC, with them in the steward's office, which I have to say is quite a new thing. And I really hope, I got to say, that lawyers and a barrister don't decide who wins the World Championship, because that's not how it should be decided, in my view. Red Bull, though, have announced that they are prepared to fight Mercedes in court if necessary. So that's the latest news from that controversial situation. Ultimately, I don't think that I honestly do not think that, what do you call it, the championship we took off Max Verstappen, I just don't see it happening. I don't think it will happen, because I don't think it's a clear enough slam dunk. And I think, like I said, because the race should have got going anyway, and I think the biggest mistake was not letting the cars through a lap earlier. I think it will, Max's title will be confirmed. So yeah, I think definitely it will, go through just fine. But yeah, that's the latest news from the controversy in Abu Dhabi. If there's any more news, of course, we'll see in the coming days, and I don't think we'll hear anything over Christmas, but in January, I think, if there's any updates, if Mercedes do get their appeal out in time, we'll see what happens there. But yeah, guys, that is it for this live stream. And of course, like I announced, the two big topics I covered tonight, the Hamilton Verstappen title race review and the midfield battle. I have recorded this stream, so I will separate those into clips and upload them separately tomorrow and Wednesday. So, for example, for Crystal Racing, who's only just joined, if you want to catch up, then just go and watch those tomorrow. Tomorrow, the Hamilton Verstappen title race review will be out around 4-5 p.m. And then the same for the midfield review as well. But this is, guys, the last live stream, the last, I guess you could say, new piece of content of the year. The next time I will be live will be the 10th of January 2022. I already know the topics for that video. I might as well reveal them because it gives a bit of a teaser for what you guys are in for on that particular day. It's a Monday, by the way, that particular day. What I'm going to be getting into is, firstly, even though he has lost the championship battle, I'm going to get into, is Lewis Hamilton the greatest of all time? And also get into, did Sergio Perez actually do that well at Red Bull? Or was it down to him, you know, in comparison to Gasly and Albon, just having a faster car? We'll get into that as well on the 10th of January. But yeah, that's it for this stream. That's it for the year. And yeah, those stream clips, like I said, they'll be uploaded tomorrow and Wednesday, so you guys can catch up on anything you missed from this stream. But I just got to say, everyone watching now, yeah, thank you so much for this year. I hope I've kept you entertained with the content this year. Also, again, massive thanks to Niblo, who, of course, was on the race watch along yesterday. That moment we had together on that final lap, that's a moment we're never going to forget. And also, I hope I kept you guys entertained with my commentary. All I remember is just screaming my head off, basically, for an entire lap. My voice, as you can hear, is still a bit damaged from it because, yeah, I was just screaming at the top of my lungs. But, yeah, hopefully we kept you guys entertained. Also, thanks to all the mods. Tonka, who's in the chat, I can see right now. Obviously, Nib is a moderator. And also, a massive thank you to someone who's always there every step of the way. An unsung hero, you may say. Ruxfoot in chat. Someone I always thank at the end of every Grand Prix weekend over Discord. Yeah, as well to him in chat. Thank you so much for this year. Honestly, couldn't do it without you, mate. You know, keeping the chat in check, making sure it's, you know, a sane environment, not an absolutely insane cesspit like, for example, Twitter is. Yeah, thankfully you've kept it a nice and cordial environment. And like I said, massive appreciation, massive thanks to you. Very, very good moderator. And hopefully you'll be with me next season for what is going to be hopefully a very exciting Formula 1 season. And again, to everyone who has subscribed, especially you know, the people who have newly subscribed, and also the old, you know, the people who have stuck around really since they subscribed to the channel a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, of course 3.5 years ago I started this channel. Again, thank you so much. Appreciate the support massively. And like I said, hopefully for the new content starting in January, you will join me for that. And then, yeah, when testing comes about, of course, that's when we'll get going and we'll be able to enjoy another Formula 1 season. Next season, of course, the longest season in F1 history. It'll start, I think, a week earlier and finish a month earlier. So it's going to be a very, very quick season as well. And yeah, cannot wait to see what happens next season. But guys, yeah, if you are new to the channel, this is your first time watching, then don't forget to subscribe for the new content coming up in January. Bottom right of the screen, you can sub right there. And whilst you're around as well, if you go to my channel page, you can hit the notifications bell there and subscribe at the same time if it's easier for you doing it that way. Smash a like button as well and share this video and channel everywhere you can. It does help the channel grow. And as well, do not forget to join my Discord server, because if you want to keep up to date with my content as well over the winter break, notifications are better in my Discord server as long as you're active. If you want notifications for my streams that are coming over the winter, then make sure to join the Discord server, and the link is down below. But guys, yeah, those two parts of the stream, they'll be uploaded tomorrow and Wednesday respectively. But guys, until next year, and again, next time I'll be live, 10th of January 2022, probably 8 PM UK time again. Until then, guys, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And it has been me, Shazza HD. Goodbye.